A poor girl said to the billionaire CEO. Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours. A young woman, her uniform a little worn, refilled Alexander Morgan's coffee. Her gaze lingered on the unique gold ring adorning his left hand, a family heirloom with a striking emerald, supposedly one of a kind. Excuse me, sir, she began softly. My mother has a ring just like yours. Alexander Morgan, CEO of Morgan Enterprises, felt a jolt. The usual din of the Manhattan cafe dissolved as his focus sharpened on the waitress. Her name tag read Emma Reynolds. Around 22, he guessed, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Despite the faint dark circles under her eyes, her posture held a quiet dignity. She didn't strike him as someone seeking attention with a fabricated story. Excuse me. His voice, sharper than he intended, drew glances from nearby tables. Emma blinked, her composure faltering. Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I shouldn't have said anything. Just, my mother has a photo with a ring that looks exactly like that one. The emerald, the unique engravings. It just caught my eye. Alexander's thoughts spun. This ring was one of a kind, custom made in Italy for his grandfather 60 years ago. No replicas, no copies. It had moved from grandfather to father, then to Alexander himself 5 years prior, after his father's passing. Your mother has this exact ring? He held up his hand, the emerald glinting. Had, Emma corrected softly, her gaze dropping. She passed away last year. But there's an old photograph where she's wearing it. I was just going through her things last weekend and noticed it. She shifted, uncomfortable. I really shouldn't have said anything. Can I get you anything else, sir? Alexander checked his watch. He was already running late for a board meeting, with a $300 million acquisition hanging in the balance. Yet Emma's words had snagged his attention. What was your mother's name? He asked. Catherine. Catherine Reynolds, though her maiden name was Summers, Emma replied, clearly surprised by his persistence. Catherine Summers. The name meant nothing. But Alexander couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something significant lay hidden here. His father, Richard Morgan, had always been fiercely private about his past. I'd like to see this photograph, he stated, producing a business card and handing it to her. If you're comfortable, of course. Emma's eyes widened as she read. Alexander Morgan, Chief Executive Officer, Morgan Enterprises. You're that Morgan? From the Morgan Tower, she whispered. Alexander nodded, accustomed to the reaction. At 35, he was one of the youngest CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, a billionaire known for ruthless, calculating decisions, never letting emotion cloud his judgment. I don't know if that's appropriate, Emma began. Please, Alexander interrupted. I'm genuinely curious. Call my office and my assistant will arrange a time. He wasn't entirely sure why it mattered so much, but the idea of someone else possessing his unique family ring felt wrong. 2 days later, Emma Reynolds stepped into the intimidating glass and steel lobby of Morgan Tower. Clutching a small envelope, she felt painfully out of place in her best outfit, a simple blouse and skirt that had seemed perfectly fine until she passed the impeccably dressed executives gliding by. The receptionist eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion but directed her to the executive elevator when she mentioned her appointment. 62 floors up, the doors opened onto a reception area larger than Emma's entire apartment. Miss Reynolds, a polished woman greeted her. Mr. Morgan is expecting you. This way, please. Emma followed her through a hallway lined with modern art pieces that likely cost more than she'd earn in a decade. The assistant opened a door to a vast corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Alexander stood by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the city skyline. He turned as she entered, and for a moment, Emma wondered if coming here was a terrible mistake. Miss Reynolds, thank you for coming. His voice was measured, professional. Please have a seat. Emma perched nervously on the edge of an expensive-looking chair. I brought the photograph, she said, opening the envelope with slightly trembling hands. It's one of the few I have of my mother when she was young. Alexander took the faded photograph. It depicted a beautiful young woman with auburn hair, strikingly similar to Emma's, sitting on a beach. Her hand was raised in a wave, and clearly visible on her finger was what appeared to be his family ring. He sank into his chair, studying the image. When was this taken? 1995, according to the date on the back. She was 22 then. Emma watched his face carefully. Mr. Morgan, why is this ring so important? Alexander placed the photograph on his desk. This ring has been in my family for generations. My grandfather had it custom-made for my grandmother in Venice. It's unique. There shouldn't be another like it anywhere. Maybe it's just similar? A coincidence? Emma suggested. Perhaps, Alexander mused, though he rarely believed in coincidences. What do you know about your mother's life before you were born? Emma's expression clouded. Not much. She never talked about it. I know she grew up in foster care. She was a single mother. My father wasn't in the picture. She hesitated. She worked multiple jobs to support us. We never had much, but she made sure I could go to college. I'm still trying to pay off those loans, which is why I'm waiting tables while I look for something in my field. Alexander calculated quickly. If the photo was from 1995 and Emma was in her early 20s now. How old are you, Miss Reynolds? I turned 23 last month. Born in 1999, 4 years after the photo was taken. He looked back at the image, noticing details he'd missed. The carefree smile, the youthful joy on Catherine's face. Then his eyes caught something in the background, what looked distinctly like a private yacht. Do you know where this photo was taken? Emma shook her head. She never mentioned it. There are no other photos from that day. Alexander felt his phone vibrate. Probably his assistant reminding him about his next meeting. But for once, the demanding schedule of a CEO seemed distant, unimportant compared to the mystery unfolding. Miss Reynolds. Emma. He corrected himself. I'd like to investigate this further. With your permission, of course. Emma's brow furrowed. Why does this matter so much to you? Alexander glanced down at the emerald ring on his own finger, twisting it thoughtfully. I'm not entirely sure yet. But I intend to find out. The following week, Emma found herself in Alexander Morgan's private car. A sleek black Bentley with tinted windows, gliding through Manhattan traffic. She fidgeted with the strap of her worn handbag, acutely aware of how out of place she felt against the vehicle's plush leather interior. I appreciate you agreeing to help with this investigation, Alexander said, eyes fixed on a tablet where he reviewed company reports, technically off the clock for this personal mission. I'm still not sure what exactly we're investigating, Emma replied, or why someone like you would clear your schedule for this. Alexander looked up, his expression unreadable. Someone like me? A billionaire CEO? Don't you have companies to buy or sell today? Her forthrightness surprised even herself. The cafe where she worked was across from Morgan Tower, and the financial news was always on. She'd heard enough about Alexander Morgan's cutthroat tactics to know he didn't waste time on trivialities. A hint of amusement flickered across his face. I've postponed dismantling the economy until tomorrow. Emma's lips twitched. Apparently, the ruthless CEO possessed a dry wit. To answer your question, he continued, his tone turning serious. This ring is more than just jewelry. It represents my family's legacy. If there's a duplicate, or if it was ever outside our family's possession, I need to understand how. He paused. And frankly, there's something about your mother's photograph that doesn't add up. The car pulled up to a stately building on the Upper East Side. Emma immediately recognized it from architectural magazines, the Morgan Family Foundation, housed in what was once the Morgan family mansion. My father's personal archives are kept here, Alexander explained as they walked through the ornate lobby. Staff members nodded respectfully as he passed, eyeing Emma with curious glances. They entered a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and furniture polish. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held leather-bound volumes and document boxes. At the center, a large oak table, where an elderly gentleman arranged papers. Miss Reynolds, this is Harold Pierce. He was my father's personal assistant for over 30 years, and now manages our family archives. Harold's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Emma, though he quickly masked his reaction with a professional smile. A pleasure to meet you, Miss Reynolds. Harold, we're looking into something rather specific, Alexander said, placing the photograph of Emma's mother on the table. This was taken in 1995. The woman is wearing what appears to be my family's emerald ring. Harold picked up the photograph, his hand trembling slightly as he studied it. "I see," he said quietly, a tone that made Emma suspect he saw more than he admitted. "Do you recognize her?" Alexander pressed. "I couldn't say with certainty," Harold replied carefully. "It was a long time ago, and your father knew many people." Alexander frowned. "Harold, if there's something you know, perhaps we should start with the yacht." Harold interrupted, pointing to the background of the photo. "That's the Artemis, your father's yacht from 1990 to 1997. He sold it after." He trailed off, glancing uncomfortably at Emma. "After what?" Emma asked. Harold looked to Alexander, who gave a slight nod of permission. "After your father's first serious heart attack, Mr. Morgan. The doctors advised him to reduce stress and simplify his life. The yacht represented his more carefree days." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You're saying this photo was taken on my father's yacht?" "It appears so," Harold confirmed. Emma felt the ground shift beneath her. That would mean her mother knew Alexander's father, Richard Morgan. Harold busied himself adjusting his glasses. Mr. Morgan entertained many guests on that yacht. Summer cruises along the Mediterranean were a tradition for several years. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Harold, you're being deliberately vague. What exactly was the nature of these cruises?" The elderly man sighed. "Your father valued his privacy, especially regarding his personal life before he married your mother." "My parents married in 1997, Alexander said, more for Emma's benefit than Harold's. 2 years after this photo was taken." Emma felt a chill. The timing, the ring, the yacht. "Are you suggesting my mother and your father were?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," Alexander said sharply, though his mind was clearly racing down the same path. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps the logs would be helpful. He moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a leather-bound book. "Your father kept meticulous records of his yacht guests." They gathered around as Harold opened the logbook to the summer of 1995. There, written in elegant script under the date matching the photograph, was a list of names. And among them, Catherine Summers. "She was there," Emma whispered, touching her mother's maiden name on the page. "But why would she be on a billionaire's yacht? My mother was a waitress just like me." Alexander frowned. "It says here she was part of the entertainment staff. What does that mean, Harold?" The older man looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Your father often hired young people, students mostly, to serve as hosts, servers, and sometimes performers. Many were working their way through college." Emma's mind flashed to all the times her mother had told her education was the key to a better life. How she'd worked so hard to ensure Emma could attend college. Had Catherine been working on the yacht to fund her own education? "That still doesn't explain the ring," Alexander said, turning the pages of the logbook. Then he stopped abruptly, his finger landing on an entry from August 1995. The color drained from his face. "What is it?" Emma asked, leaning forward. "Ring missing after Capri Shore excursion," Alexander read aloud. "KS helping with search." He looked up at Harold. "The family ring went missing during that cruise." Harold nodded slowly. "It was eventually found, of course. Your father was tremendously relieved. It had simply been misplaced in his cabin or returned?" Alexander suggested, his voice hardening. Emma stood, anger flashing in her eyes. "If you're implying my mother stole it—" "I'm not implying anything," Alexander said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm trying to understand why your mother appears in a photograph wearing my family's ring, and why that ring subsequently went missing." "This was a mistake," Emma said, grabbing her bag. "I don't know what happened 30 years ago, but my mother was a good person. She worked herself to exhaustion providing for me. She wasn't a thief." Alexander caught her arm as she turned to leave. "Wait. I apologize if I sounded accusatory, but you must admit this raises questions." Emma pulled away from his grasp. "The only question I have is why my mother, who could barely afford our rent, would have a photo of herself wearing an expensive ring on a billionaire's yacht, yet never mentioned any of this to me." "That's what I intend to find out," Alexander said. "And I think we both deserve answers, don't you?" Emma hesitated, torn between walking away from this complicated situation and uncovering the truth about her mother's past. "There's one more thing you should see," Harold said quietly, removing an envelope from inside the logbook. This was with the entry about the missing ring. He handed it to Alexander, who opened it and removed a faded photograph. His expression changed to one of genuine shock as he looked at it, then at Emma. "What?" she asked. Wordlessly, he handed her the photograph. It showed her mother, young and radiant, standing next to a handsome man Emma recognized as a younger Richard Morgan from the portraits in the building's lobby. They were laughing together, his arm around her shoulders, and they looked very much in love. Emma sat on a bench in Central Park, the photograph of her mother and Richard Morgan clutched in her hands. A week had passed since the discovery in the Morgan archives, and her world had tilted on its axis. Alexander sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance as she processed everything. "I've canceled all my meetings today," he said, breaking the silence. "Harold has agreed to speak with us more openly about what he knows." Emma nodded, still staring at the photograph. "My entire life my mother told me she never knew who my father was. A brief relationship that ended before she knew she was pregnant." She looked up at Alexander, her eyes a mix of hurt and confusion. "Why would she lie to me?" Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral. "We don't know for certain that my father is." "Look at this picture, Alexander." Emma interrupted, her voice strained. "They weren't just acquaintances. And look at me. Then look at photos of your father at my age. The same eyes. The same jawline." It was true, and Alexander had noticed it immediately. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The possibility that Emma might be his half-sister had kept him awake for the past 7 nights. "If what we suspect is true," Alexander said cautiously, "there would have been reasons for secrecy. My father was engaged to my mother when this photo was taken. Their marriage was practically a merger between 2 wealthy families. A scandal would have ruined his perfect image. So instead, my mother raised me in near poverty while he lived in luxury," Emma finished bitterly. Alexander didn't have a good response. His father had been a complicated man, brilliant in business but deeply private and often distant, even with his own son. The idea that Richard Morgan might have abandoned a child didn't align with the father Alexander thought he knew. But neither did a secret romance with a yacht staffer. "Let's hear what Harold has to say before drawing conclusions," he suggested. They met Harold at a small discreet cafe, far from Morgan Tower. The elderly man seemed relieved to be speaking away from the family property. "I've worked for the Morgan family for 42 years, Harold began, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "I've kept many secrets that weren't mine to tell. But with both Richard and Catherine gone," he sighed heavily. "Perhaps the truth should finally come to light." "So there was a relationship between them?" Alexander pressed. Harold nodded. "Catherine was different from the other girls your father met. She was working as a server on the yacht that summer saving money for nursing school. She was intelligent, genuine qualities Richard wasn't accustomed to in his social circle." A fond smile briefly crossed his face. She challenged him, made him laugh. By the end of that Mediterranean cruise, they were inseparable. "But he was engaged to my mother," Alexander pointed out. "An arrangement made by his parents." "And yours," Harold replied. "Richard had little say in it. The merger between Morgan Industries and Westfield Enterprises was worth billions. And your grandparents were determined to cement it through marriage." Emma leaned forward. "What about the ring?" Harold's expression grew somber. "That's where things became complicated. Richard gave Catherine the ring as a promise that he would find a way to break his engagement and be with her. It was reckless, impulsive, very unlike him. But he was in love. Then what happened?" Emma whispered. "Reality intervened," Harold said. "Richard's father suffered a stroke. On his deathbed he made Richard promise to honor the engagement, to secure the family legacy. Richard was torn. But ultimately, he trailed off, looking apologetically at Emma. "He chose duty over love," Alexander finished. Harold nodded. "Catherine returned the ring voluntarily. That's the missing ring mentioned in the logbook. She didn't want to keep it under the circumstances." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. "And me? Did he know about me?" Harold glanced away. "Catherine discovered she was pregnant weeks after they parted ways. She wrote to Richard, but by then, preparations for his wedding to Elizabeth were already underway. Richard came to me in a panic, unsure what to do. And what did my father decide? Alexander asked, his voice tight. He sent money. A significant amount, with the condition that Catherine would never contact him again or reveal the child's paternity. Harold looked genuinely pained. I was the intermediary. Catherine rejected the money at first, but eventually accepted a smaller sum. Only enough to help with medical bills during her pregnancy. She was very proud. Emma felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. So he knew about me all along. He just didn't want me. It's not that simple, Harold said gently. Your mother made him promise to stay away. She didn't want her child raised in a world of privilege without genuine love. She believed she could provide a more authentic life, even if it meant struggling financially. And my father agreed to this arrangement? Alexander asked incredulously. Not entirely. He set up a trust in Emma's name, a modest one that would provide for education without revealing his identity. Harold turned to Emma. Your college scholarship from the Future Nurses Foundation? That was Richard. He watched your progress from afar. Emma's mind reeled. The scholarship that had made her education possible, her path to a better life, had come from her biological father all along. Why didn't my mother ever tell me? Even after he died. Emma's voice cracked. Catherine made a promise, and she believed it was better for you not to live in the shadow of a father who couldn't acknowledge you publicly. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing the small cafe. I need to make some calls. What are you doing? Emma asked. Arranging a DNA test, he replied, his businesslike tone returning. If you're agreeable, we should confirm everything before proceeding further. Proceeding with what? Determining your rightful place in the Morgan family. If that's what you want. The test results arrived 3 days later in Alexander's private office. Emma sat across from him as he opened the envelope, her heart hammering in her chest. The clinical language confirmed what they already suspected. A 99.9% probability that they shared a father. Emma was a Morgan. I'll have the legal team draw up the necessary documents to formally recognize you, Alexander said, already typing on his phone. There will be inheritance implications, of course. My father's estate. Stop, Emma interrupted. I don't want his money. Alexander looked up, genuinely confused. It's your birthright. My birthright was to have a father who chose me, she said quietly. Money can't replace that. For the first time since they'd met, Alexander seemed at a loss. The business solution, financial compensation, wouldn't work here. The board meeting about the Clayton acquisition is in 15 minutes, Mr. Morgan. His assistant announced through the intercom. Cancel it, Alexander replied without hesitation. Sir, the Clayton family flew in specifically for this meeting. The merger has been in preparation for months. I said cancel it, Janet. Family emergency. He switched off the intercom and turned to Emma. Let's get out of here. What? Where are we going? I want to show you something. An hour later, they stood on the deck of a sailboat in the harbor. Much smaller than the luxury yacht from the photograph, but elegant in its simplicity. This was my personal escape, Alexander explained. When the corporate world becomes too suffocating. My father never understood my love for sailing, something I could handle myself, without a crew of 20. Emma watched him move around the boat with practiced ease, so different from the rigid CEO she'd first met. Why bring me here? She asked. Alexander paused, looking out over the water. Because you're right. Our father made a choice that can't be undone with money or legal documents. But I'm making a different choice. He turned to face her. You're my sister, Emma. The only family I have left. I'd like the chance to know you if you'll let me. The raw honesty of his admission caught her off guard. Behind his carefully maintained facade, Alexander Morgan was as alone as she had always been. Before she could respond, her phone rang. The hospital where she'd recently interviewed. With trembling hands she answered. Miss Reynolds, this is Dr. Winters from Manhattan Memorial. I'm calling about your nursing position application. Emma listened, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake, she said. I applied for a staff nurse position. not head of pediatric nursing development. Alexander assiduously avoided her gaze, suddenly very interested in adjusting a rope. I see, Emma continued, her eyes narrowing at Alexander. And the salary is? I understand. May I call you back tomorrow to discuss? Thank you. She ended the call and fixed Alexander with an accusatory stare. Did you just buy me a job? I made a phone call, he admitted. Your qualifications got you the job. You had no right, she said, anger flaring. I've worked my entire life to earn my achievements. I won't have them handed to me because I suddenly have the right last name. That's not what isn't it? Emma cut him off. Isn't that how your world works? Connections and influence rather than merit. Alexander's expression hardened. I was trying to help. By treating me like a problem to be solved? A Morgan family embarrassment to be managed? Emma shook her head in disappointment. Maybe our father's blood runs stronger in you than you realize. The word struck Alexander like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Emma's phone chimed with a text message. I have to go, she said, checking the screen. My roommate locked herself out of our apartment. Emma, wait. I need time to process all this, she said, already moving toward the dock. Please. Just give me space. Alexander watched her walk away, realizing he'd approached this entire situation like a business transaction. Identify the problem, implement a solution, move on. But Emma wasn't a corporate acquisition. She was family, and he had no idea how to be a brother when he'd spent his entire life being a CEO first and a person second. For the first time in years, Alexander Morgan had no strategy for what came next. 3 weeks passed. Emma returned to her routine waiting tables, picking up extra shifts at the hospital where she'd accepted a standard nursing position, and avoiding anything related to Morgan Enterprises. She'd turned down Alexander's calls, ignored his emails, and returned the formal legal documents his attorneys had sent, recognizing her as a Morgan heir. Her tiny apartment felt safe, familiar. Here, she was still just Emma Reynolds, daughter of Catherine, not the secret child of a billionaire industrialist. Yet, each night as she sorted through her mother's belongings, a task she'd procrastinated on for months, the questions multiplied. In a small wooden box beneath her mother's sweaters, Emma found a journal she hadn't noticed before. The entries were sparse, mostly observations about Emma's childhood milestones, but tucked between the pages was an unsent letter, dated just weeks before Catherine's death. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth. Or I've run out of time to tell you myself. I hope it's the former. Your father's name was Richard Morgan. We met when I was working on his yacht, saving for nursing school. It was a summer of impossible dreams, a waitress and a billionaire. We both knew it couldn't last, but for those few months, we lived as though the world outside didn't exist. When reality intruded, we made painful choices. Richard had family obligations he couldn't escape. I had my pride and my dreams for you. The money he offered felt like payment for my silence, for disappearing. I wanted more for both of us than to be secrets kept in shadows. I returned his family ring, the one you've seen in the photograph, because I couldn't bear the weight of broken promises it represented. But I kept the most precious gift he gave me. I've watched Richard's son, Alexander, become the man his father wanted him to be. Successful, respected, powerful. Sometimes I see your father and his face on the business news, and I wonder if you would have become like him had you grown up in that world. I made my choice to keep you from that life of privilege and pressure. If that was wrong, if I deprived you of your birthright, I can only ask your forgiveness. I believe then, as I do now, that the warmth of our small apartment, the honest work of my hands, and the love between us was worth more than all the Morgan millions. Oh, my love, Mom. Emma wiped tears from her cheeks. Her mother had planned to tell her the truth, and though she'd hidden Emma's paternity, she'd done so out of love, not shame or spite. The buzzer of her apartment rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the intercom, the doorman announced, Miss Reynolds, there's a Mr. Morgan here to see you. Emma hesitated, then pressed the button. Send him up. When she opened the door, she expected to find Alexander in one of his immaculate suits, armed with more legal documents or business solutions. Instead, he stood in jeans and a casual shirt, holding a cardboard box. I know you asked for space, he said before she could speak, but I found something you should see. Emma reluctantly let him in. Her studio apartment could fit in his office bathroom, but Alexander showed no reaction to the modest surroundings. "What is it?" she asked as he set the box on her small kitchen table. "After you left that day, I went to my father's cottage in the Berkshires. A place he would go alone, away from business and family obligations. I'd rarely been there as a child." Alexander opened the box. In a hidden compartment he found these. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings and printouts. Emma's high school graduation announcement in a local paper, an article about her nursing school cohort, a program from a community theater production where she'd played a minor role, each marked with her name, carefully preserved. "He kept track of you," Alexander said quietly. "All these years." Emma lifted a small velvet pouch from the bottom of the box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small emerald pendant, a miniature version of the stone in the Morgan ring. "I had this made for you," Alexander explained. "Not to buy your forgiveness but as a symbol. The ring represented our father's broken promise. This is my promise to honor the connection between us, however you choose to define it." Emma studied the pendant, emotions conflicting within her. "I don't know if I can be a Morgan." "You don't have to be. But you are my sister, whether we share a last name or not." Alexander's voice held none of its usual commanding tone. "I've spent my entire life living up to my father's legacy, becoming what was expected of me. I don't want to repeat his mistakes." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Emma. For the first time she saw not the billionaire CEO, but a man struggling with his own identity just as she was. "I read a letter from my mother tonight," she said, handing him Catherine's final message. "I think you should see it too." Alexander read it carefully, his expression softening. When he finished he asked, "May I keep this just for a day or two? There's someone else who should read it." 2 days later, Emma found herself walking through the manicured gardens of a stately nursing home in Connecticut. Alexander led her to a sunny private room where an elegant elderly woman sat by the window. "Mother," Alexander said gently, "this is Emma Reynolds." Elizabeth Morgan turned, her eyes clouded with medication but still sharp with intelligence. "Catherine's daughter," she said, surprising them both. "I'd know those eyes anywhere." "You knew about me?" Emma asked, stunned. "My dear, little happens in the Morgan family without my knowledge, despite what the men might believe." Elizabeth gestured for Emma to sit beside her. Richard thought he was protecting everyone with his silence. Men often mistake secrecy for protection. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Alexander asked. Elizabeth took his hand. "Because your father asked for my discretion, and after 30 years of marriage I owed him that much." She turned to Emma. "But I kept tabs on you. The Nursing Scholarship Foundation was actually my project, though Richard provided the funding." Emma felt dizzy with this new revelation. So both of them were watching over her from a distance. "We wanted to respect Catherine's wishes," Elizabeth explained. "She was remarkable. She refused Richard's money but agreed to let him help with your education, as long as you never knew the source. She wanted you to believe you earned everything through your own merit. Which you did. Which is why you were so upset when I tried to interfere with your job," Alexander realized, speaking to Emma. "I've never wanted handouts," Emma confirmed. Elizabeth smiled. "You have your mother's pride and your father's stubborn determination." She reached for a small box on her side table. "I asked Alexander to bring you here because I have something for you." Inside the box was a pair of emerald earrings that matched the ring Alexander wore. "These were meant to accompany the ring, but Richard never gave them to your mother. They've been in my jewelry box all these years." Elizabeth closed Emma's fingers around the box. "They belong with you now." "I can't accept these," Emma protested. "You can and you will," Elizabeth said firmly. "Not as charity, but as recognition of your birthright. What you do with that birthright is entirely your choice." 6 months later, Emma stood on the deck of Alexander's sailboat, watching the Manhattan skyline fade as they headed out into the harbor. The emerald pendant glinted at her throat, matched by the earrings from Elizabeth. "Dr. Bennett asked about you again," Emma mentioned casually. "I think he was disappointed you couldn't make it to the hospital fundraiser last weekend." Alexander adjusted the sail, avoiding her gaze. I had a board meeting. You always have meetings, Emma smirked. But he specifically asked if you'd be at the director's dinner next Friday. Are you trying to set me up with your boss? Alexander asked, finally looking at her. He's the chief of surgery, not my boss. And he's brilliant, kind, and as I've mentioned multiple times, single. Alexander shook his head. I don't need my little sister playing matchmaker. Half-sister, Emma corrected with a grin. And you absolutely do need help. When was the last time you went on a date that wasn't with a potential business partner? The months since their discovery had changed them both. Emma had accepted a position with the Morgan Family Foundation, heading a new program providing medical training for underprivileged youth, while maintaining her hospital work. Alexander had stepped back from day-to-day operations at Morgan Enterprises, focusing instead on restructuring the company's philanthropic initiatives. And they had become, against all odds, actual siblings bickering, supporting, and challenging each other in ways neither had experienced before. Fine, Alexander conceded. I'll come to the dinner. But only because the foundation should be represented. Of course, Emma agreed, hiding her smile. Just like the last 4 hospital events you've attended had nothing to do with how often you and James end up deep in conversation. The wind picked up, filling the sail. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face and the salt spray on her skin. In her pocket was the key to a new apartment, larger, in a better neighborhood, but still chosen and paid for by her alone. She'd accepted her connection to the Morgan name, but insisted on maintaining her independence. Do you think they would have eventually found their way back to each other? She asked suddenly. Our parents, if circumstances had been different? Alexander considered the question. I think they did the best they could with the choices available to them, just like we're trying to do now. Emma nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The past couldn't be changed, but its legacy lived on in their choices. That evening, as Alexander walked Emma to her door, she noticed James Bennett waiting on the steps of her building, 2 coffee cups in hand. I thought your dinner with Dr. Bennett wasn't until next week, Alexander remarked, eyes narrowing suspiciously. That's the director's dinner, Emma corrected innocently. This is just coffee. You're incorrigible, Alexander muttered. I prefer strategically minded, Emma replied. A Morgan family trait, I'm told. As James approached with a warm smile, Emma felt the emerald pendant at her throat, a small piece of the past connecting to her future. The ring that had once symbolized a promise between her parents now had new meaning. Not a secret to be kept, but a story to be honored. And as she introduced the 2 most important men in her life to each other, Emma knew with certainty that some circles were meant to be completed, even if they took a generation to find their way.